Howdy folks, welcome to the Scannell Agenda. It's my lovely wife, Pam Scannell.
Welcome.
I'm Steve Scannell. Today's date is July 16th, 2018. This is show number 89, entitled Rip Map and Tell. Now, what I'm talking about is a rip that you don't want to get caught in when you're out swimming, if you're a swimmer. It's something hard to see. It's, to some people, impossible to see. But I want to be able to map the rips where people are swimming. So this is one of the things, I didn't know what I was going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a bunch of different little things, but this is just one of my little projects. And it falls under the category rescue, and it falls under the category of invention. Now, a rip map would have to have sensors that would tell which way the current was flowing in the beach area where people are swimming. So you'd have to put a lot of little sensors that would give you the indication of which way the current is flowing in the water waist deep, let's say. And so assuming we can do that, and we can do that pretty easily, I've got one fashioned up here with something like a ping pong ball that would give its location to the base, and then the sensor would have wires and it would go to a computer, and the computer would keep track of the currents where the people were swimming. Now, you wouldn't really be aware of it if you were just a swimmer swimming around. But they could be marked, but they wouldn't want to be interfered with. Now, the tell, it's called Rip Map and Tell, would be a flag, which would alert not only your lifeguards, but your swimmers as to where the rip current was flowing out. Now, people don't realize this, but since I'm so astute and such a great observer, sometimes I just, look. You can actually go to a pond and see a rip current in the waters of the pond in a miniature form. So you can see the waves, the little waves lapping up on a pond. I think I was showing you this once a couple of years ago. I said, hey, this is a rip, and this is where the water gets pushed up hydraulically, let's say, up onto the sand of the beach, and then it gets pushed up, and then it wants to rush out somewhere. So it sometimes digs itself a little channel, and the wind may be coming from this way or almost straight on, or from this way on the beach. Let's say this is the beach. And then so the water is getting pushed up a little bit higher, and water wants to run downhill, gravity, right? And so it'll find a little escape route. That's the rip. That's the water escapes back downhill. It gets pushed uphill. It wants to go downhill, and it has to have an escape to do that. So I don't think there's too many rip currents down in, let's say, Red River Beach. But in the Atlantic, such as the beaches outside in Nauset and Chatham and Nantucket, the backside of Nantucket, which, those are all very prevalent to have serious rips where a strong swimmer would get swept out, and in 30 seconds, he may be getting, or she may be getting pushed out and not even realize it. And then you look up and you say, wow, where am I now? I didn't remember swimming out this far. Mm-hmm. So what you're supposed to do if you do get caught in a rip current is to swim along the shore. Pick a direction one way or the other. Don't swim in.
I've heard even floating is good.
You can't swim in because you'll be swimming against the tide, as they say, against the current. Fishermen use the word tide to mean current quite often, whereas technically tide is the rise and fall of the water. And the current is the lateral flow of the water going this way, like a little river. All right, so the flag would be put up. It would be attached to these sensors, and that would be your tell. That would tell you, bingo, the flag went up here, and that's the rip. And so the lifeguard could say, all right, be careful, or he could say, just stay out of there, or she, many women lifeguards. So we want safety for the tourists, right? I think we prayed for that on the earlier show, Prayer and Pizza, huh?
Yeah. Not,
we,
I don't know, safety. I know we prayed for them to go to church.
oh, that's it. That's what we did. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And this reminds me, this idea, which I had the other day, I was listening to all this information that the news people give out on the rips, and I said, well, we could map the rip. We could. Why not? Why not map it? I mean, I could do that. I could put the equipment together off the shelf, but be difficult off the shelf. But you know what I mean. I mean, you use scientific instruments to determine these flows of water. Now, once you have discovered where the rip is, you could dye the water. And people could say, oh, so that's what happens once in a while, where the water has to find a path back downhill, let's say. That's what happens. Oh, okay, it would be very instructive. And you could put a strong swimmer in a good rip, and you'd have a little 13-foot Boston whaler out there to pick them up. Go ahead, get in the rip, see how you do. Swim against that tide, see how you do. I mean, it'd be pretty tough. It'd be like swimming in the Cape Cod Canal against the tide, which I've tried to do. It's very difficult, even with fins. It can be very, very difficult. So this could be a safety thing for the swimmers. So the little ball attached to the electronic sensor would flow with the tide. Let's say a little ping pong ball would want to get carried with the tide. Maybe it would want to be carried and then retrieved, carried and then retrieved, so that your sensor could locate that ping pong ball or pinger and give that location, and then you would have your distance and height from the sensor would calculate that, and then it would send the signal to the computer via the wires, probably under the sand. So this is the rip tide that we don't want to get caught in. Rip, map, and tell. It would be a rip map in real time. Now, if you built up the database, you could tell most likely if the wind's coming from this direction on this particular beach, and this is the tide, let's say high tide, low tide, what those tides are doing, then you could almost map it out where it's gonna be. And that would be the challenge, to keep the tourists safe. Adults, you're out there swimming, you're maybe up to your neck in water, and you're swimming around innocently, and before you know it, you're swept out to sea. Isn't that something? So not so much on Red River Beach, Bank Street Beach, Pleasant Street Beach. These are the inshore, in Nantucket Sound beaches, but when we're talking about the Nauset Beach area, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and what's that favorite beach of yours in Long Island again?
Oh, Jones Beach.
Jones Beach. That would be very, very susceptible.
That'd be very difficult to get out of a riptide.
Yeah. So you've got some powerful waves coming in, pushing a lot of water up on the beach, and then whoosh, that water wants to escape. That's the rip. So we can conquer that. Now I'm going to go and just get off of that. I'm just going to go. Thought I'd talk about prophets old and new, but we don't talk about new prophets. But you considered your brother Kevin to be a prophet, didn't you?
Yeah, I'd say he was a prophet. is a part.
I
that-
certainly think that he had such a gift for his style of preaching, which was so unique. He was just a budding preacher, and a lot of people felt that way.
Yeah.
Um,
His rhyming and stuff was just fantastic.
yeah. Yep.
And his humor.
Yeah. And you grew up with Kevin, and Kevin always treated you pretty good, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
We were kind of like twins because the age was kind of strange. It was a year, I think, and a month older than myself, you know, so that was very close in age.
Yeah. I'd like to speak with C.L. Fanari. She's got a gardening show that I love listening to. You remember me talking about the bittersweet? And I was going over this bittersweet thing with you about how we need to have better ways of getting the bittersweet pulled. Well, I've been working on this bittersweet puller invention for a while. And I like to have some friends who are in the landscaping, gardening, farming area have a look at that. Our
That
bittersweet
sounds
in
good.
front of our house at 836
Route 28.
Route 28 in Harwich or South Harwich, however you want to look at it. Now that bittersweet is gotten into all these little daylilies, those beautiful orange daylilies. So basically, you're going to have trouble with that bittersweet in there unless and until you rip out the whole mess, daylilies and all, and separate them, maybe put them in pots for a while. A lot of people having a problem with bittersweet, so that's invasives are one of my specialities, you might say. So I think I'm on a pretty good track about a way to pull the bittersweet. And I had bittersweet beat me when my dad said, "Can you get that bittersweet out of there next to the brook?" I did pretty much, but it comes back pretty quick.
Like
you know?
a weed, I think it's a
It's a-
weed, I think.
It's a weed if you don't like it. If you do like it, it's not a weed. It's something that you want. Now, up on the hill, as we called it, when we were kids, we would clip out the bittersweet as the berries. And I had customers that really wanted that bittersweet. So right there, it wasn't a weed to me because I made money on that every year. I'd pick the pussy willows, I'd pick the bittersweet, the blackberries, and a lot of other different things. All right, now I want to get into, back to the marine environment here. I'm working on eelgrass cultivation, as you know. And I've been working on kelp cultivation too. Now, if you're not familiar with kelp cultivation, you want to see a show that we saw last night on 60 Minutes. It was a rerun. It was about a guy that's growing sugar kelp in conjunction with mussels and oysters on a long line. And he also has a little hatchery for the sugar kelp. And people are eating it. It's catching on, and we could be doing that here. Let's say if Yarmouth and Dennis and Harwich had a little enterprise, the three towns together for the eelgrass. We could also grow some kelp or some dulse out there. It would employ a lot of people. It would be gainful employment if you planned it right.
What's dulse?
Dulse is the most delicious seaweed. It's one of my favorite foods. Remember I was reading in Wooden Boat about how that guy built his own little dory and he went over to one side of an island, had good dulse up in Canada, and that's what he was. He was a dulse picker. So every seaweed and everything in
Does
the
it
ocean.
kind of taste like spinach, the seaweed?
It's very pungent. It has a very strong flavor. Yeah, it's kind of like spinach. We'll get some. I think we've had it before. Okay, for this offshore eelgrass cultivation installation, which would be pretty big, and I have it positioned southwest of Nantucket, 10 or 15 or 20 miles in that zone. And you could do this in conjunction with windmills. The windmills would help immensely with this kind of an operation because they'd be good anchors. Now, especially if they were dense pack windmills that were smaller windmills tighter together. You could use those as anchors. For what I have here is a kelp table for cultivating your kelp, which would have on the interior, after the waves were broken down sufficiently by all these kelp cultivation installations, then you would have eelgrass, floating eelgrass beds. This is something brand new. This is aquaculture, but I haven't heard of this being proposed. I've been studying eelgrass for decades, and I doodle on the clipboard, and this is what I come up with, and then I tend to refine it. I do about probably 5 or 10 pages a day right now, on average, of different projects. And if a project comes to mind, like the RIP map and tell, which was the first time I wrote that up, okay, it usually develops after that. It's called research and development. It starts on the clipboard, or as some people say, the backside of a napkin, and then it makes progress. Your next level is to work with people and to prototype up what you think may work. Like with the bittersweet puller, you know, you work with people that are actually expert gardeners, etc. Okay, so this kelp table is like, okay, this is big with fishery management, this stuff. And a little side project would be the question, would we have a rabbit farm with no grass? No, of course not. But today, with the stresses in the ocean on everything that's living in the ocean, with the CO2 stresses especially, the environments are changing, and we want to be battling against these changes with prevention of the global warming instigators, the negatives that put all this CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, that's big. And with our energy system that I was calling the TRIPE, but I call it the Green Grid Transit System, which is a monorail with bundled pipes. It's a way to ship the green energy anywhere, from anywhere to anywhere, on the monorails. So I do claim to have solved the energy crisis with that system, simply because I cracked the problem of energy, green energy, storage, and transportation or shipment. So the problem has always been, okay, if you have a windmill and it's 500 miles away, let's say up on the Grand Banks, or 300 miles away up on the Grand Banks, okay, how do you get that energy to Boston and New York and Philadelphia? How do you do that? With my system, you put the energy in pipes in the form of hydrogen, simple compressed air, and then something I call ORCA, oxygen-rich compressed air, which has many different uses. So we've already conquered how to build and run a windmill, and we've already conquered how to use hydrogen once you have hydrogen. But that's it. The hydrogen economy is coming soon with this green grid transit system. And if you Google up monorails, I think you'd like mine the best, which is a dovetail track, single, double, triple tracks. And the triple tracks that can run from, let's say, Los Angeles, California, through Georgia, and then they would be carrying containers. You know, you see the trucks carry all these containers. And you remember we went through New Jersey on our way to Florida, and we saw all those containers and the ships, and the container ports where they take the containers on and off the boats. Well, this would be the really fast shipment of containers from coast to coast. And speed's so important with the transportation and shipping. So the eelgrass and kelp, I'm working on those two in conjunction as part of the same system. Now here with this particular drawing here, you see that there are rocks being held up, suspended in the water. These are rocks, these are rocks. And then what you'll do is the same thing that this guy on 60 Minutes did. He's in Connecticut. You'll be seeding these rocks with the kelp. And it's not all that difficult to do. So these things have to be gotten after as far as research and development, prototyping these things. But first thing comes, the fishery system has to change first, because people aren't going to shell out money to do this stuff. You're only going to shell out money as a taxpayer if you can see that there's a cash flow. Okay, if we plant kelp, where's the money coming from? Well, it's coming from cod and lobster and flounder that comes in and the fishermen sell, but the fishermen have to pay a percentage of the value of what they're catching. Fishermen hate me for saying this, but that's the way it's got to be. So I call that pick your own strawberries. I call it the market quota system or the sea farm. It's just getting away from straight foraging, you know, just picking. You got to be able to make Mother Nature better, God's great earth, the bounty. You've got to make it better, add to it. Like a baker can make 10 pies, or we can fight over the one pie that we have, or we can bake more pies. I say bake more pies. So that's basic philosophy there. It's more or less simply adapting the free enterprise system to our fisheries. So if we get the right rocks and we get the kelp growing on the rocks, and we can take those rocks and we can put them here, over here, where the kelp bed used to be, pretty soon you got yourself a full-fledged bed of kelp. And of course, you're not going to allow people to get in there and ruin that. So I'm working hard on the kelp. I'm working hard on the eelgrass for offshore. 5 minutes to go. Okay, so it's about 2 minutes after 4. So I do a lot of work with laminate technologies of different kinds. And I like to have some fun. I do this as one's a Salty Hams Club about, you know, boat people, you know, boat rental and acting and going in the parades. Just it's people that are doing electrical work all day. Like my son, he's a fireman, electrician. You want to have an outlet, you know. You want to have a shop you can go to and work on boats and, you know, grab a boat and go fishing. This business of having your own boat, for guys around Cape Cod, that's nonsense. A good boat will cost you $20,000 or $30,000. It's just asking too much. You know, you're raising a family. So the Salty Hams guys and gals could be, you know, raising money for fundraising, doing the parades, helping the kids get out fishing, the future fishermen of America. It kind of, a lot of my things that I come up with, they tend to dovetail into, you know, other projects. So when I say if we want to do this kelp, if we want to do this eelgrass cultivation, and then all the money that comes from the eelgrass and the kelp is huge. Okay, but that's because when you land codfish and when you land scallops, it's because they're coming from a wealthy, rich environment that we don't really have right now. We don't have it because the problem is we're not doing asset management. We're not controlling, and we're not really not management. There is no management, because if we're not controlling habitat destruction, I say we're not managing. We're not asset managing. So this is what I've been preaching for many years, and I do mean preaching. So we got to consider all the values, like the waterfront estate values, working waterfront values, the fish for the general public, that has a value. The health cost savings of having fish, these are all values on the table. Better brain savings, productivity, better brain, what does that mean? If you eat seafood, seafood is the brain food. And so you're going to have smarter kids, more productive kids growing up, more healthier people doing more work. That's productivity. So there's a lot of little tentacles economically. And we need to rebuke ourselves and our bad ways with the fisheries, and I'm going to help us to do that. I'm going to help us with things like the codfish apology. In other words, if we went to Nebraska, you've heard that saying, right? A prophet is without honor in his own community and family.
I think I heard something like that, yeah.
I could make
In
this
his own
speech here on
country, I
Cape
think.
Cod, and they'd say, get out of here, you nitwit. You know, what's that guy that, and Don McCaig calls everybody a nitwit. Now, if I went with you to Nebraska with this codfish apology, and I explained to these cultivators, these people are totally all about agriculture. And I'm talking about agriculture of the sea with these people who are all about agriculture. They're going to say, hey, why aren't you listening to Steve? He seems to make sense. You mean you think he makes no sense at all? Raising eelgrass, raising kelp, cash flow systems for all the stuff in the ocean. Our ways are bad. It's not that it's bad to love fishermen, but it's proven itself to be not the way to go. So anyway, that's another boring show. If you have trouble sleeping, my God, watch this show, right? It's dry stuff. But you add to the show quite a bit, honey.
Very good.
So thanks for watching
Yes.
the Scannell Agenda. I almost said prayer and pizza. Thanks for watching the Scannell Agenda.